Hello, I'm Dr. Manuel G. Saldivar. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a university faculty member. On this channel, I focus on ideas and concepts that will help you become more successful as a college student. Please join me for today's episode. As a college student, you probably have had many people like me, or teachers in the high school level perhaps, offer you advice on note taking. And I will be another one to do the same thing. Today I'll be talking about visual note taking. First, however, I want to acknowledge that there is not one perfect note taking system, so I won't pretend that visual note taking that I'll be discussing today or any other approach is always helpful, that it will be 100% effective in helping you take notes and learn better. However, there are a lot of students that use approaches to note taking, to studying, that are not effective. We know that from many decades of research into college students. In fact, I would encourage you to watch some of my earlier videos in this video series. I'll link some of them in the description box below if you want additional information. So, it is the case that not every student necessarily will benefit from every particular note-taking system, but visual note-taking does have a lot of evidence supporting it. There are a number of cases we can point to in the research literature where we show that students using this approach do find it helpful. So at a minimum, I would encourage you to at least consider this approach of visual note-taking. Try it a few times. You may be surprised by how beneficial it is for your learning. So what do we mean by visual note-taking? A few years ago, I was following my university's Instagram feed, and one of the posts was from a student, and you can see that it's a photo of someone sitting having lunch, and they've spilled some water, it looks like, on their notes. What I want to draw your attention to is actually the notes themselves. They're not super easy to read, but basically you can tell that these notes are not just a block of text, they're not just bullet points or an outline, they are a visual representation. They're an example of visual notes. The point that I'm making here, the reason I share this photo with you, is because this shows that students, real students just like you, do use this technique of visual note-taking. It's not just something that a professor like me made up to give you more work to do. Actual students use this technique and benefit from it. So this is another reason why I would encourage you to give it a try. Other students are already using this approach and have found it helpful, and you may find it helpful as well. Now, there are three basic kinds of visual notes. The first kind is a progression or a sequence. Most of us have used this approach at one time or another, even if we don't necessarily have the label or the name to put on it to call this a progression or sequence. But this type of visual note-taking basically just involves outlining or designating the series of steps you have to follow for a certain process or to do something. Step 1, step 2, step 3. For example, if you're taking notes in a chemistry lab or some other kind of science lab, often you have to do things in a certain order in order to have the chemical reaction work the way it's expected to, for safety reasons, for all the above. So progression or sequence, step 1, step 2, step 3, pretty straightforward. Most of us are familiar with this. And again, it's just an example of a visual note-taking technique, even if we don't necessarily think of it in those terms. A hierarchy is a system where you're outlining information. You're starting with an idea, a concept, a topic that has some significance, and you're breaking down that topic into smaller pieces that are all related in some way to each other and to the larger topic. I'll talk more about this in this moment. And the final kind of visual representation is called a matrix. And this is a chart or a graph, a table where you are comparing information, comparing characteristics, or in psychology I would use the term variables. You're comparing different variables, different characteristics or aspects of multiple things. And again, I'll demonstrate what I mean with an example here in a moment. Let's return first to the idea or the concept of a hierarchy. Imagine you are studying for class. In this example, it might be an anatomy and physiology class. It might be perhaps a psychology class where you're studying the anatomy that is related to brain function. And so you might have a passage in a textbook or some other reading describing the nervous system. This information here is taken from a textbook by authors named Kira and Dubois from 1998. And so this information, by the way, is actually true, just for the record. So if we start reading through this information, you'll find that the nervous system of human beings has two major parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now, there are different ways you could approach taking notes to help you remember this information, but if you're using a visual note-taking approach, specifically creating a hierarchy, then you might start by drawing something like this. The topic, the concept, is the nervous system of human beings, and write down you're branching out to two separate categories or two major components of the nervous system: central and peripheral. If we keep reading the passage, you'll see that the central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. So again, if you want to visualize that, then you may add something like this. If you keep going through the passage, which I will not do in this video, but if you read through all this information and drew a hierarchy, you would end up with something that looks very much like this. The point I want you to take away from this exercise is, imagine you're going to class one day. You arrive early because you have 10 minutes before the professor walks in, and you're going to have an exam where part of the information you'll be tested over is information related to the human nervous system. What would you rather have in front of you to study? A nice, concise chart like the one you see on the screen that outlines this information, or a big block of text? Most students, I suspect, would probably prefer to have the hierarchy, the visual notes, the image, the picture, to help you understand these ideas instead of just relying on a big block of text. Sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for notifications. Similarly, a matrix, again, as I described earlier, is a different kind of visual note-taking. It has a little different purpose. Let's imagine you were comparing and contrasting two different colleges because you're trying to decide which college to attend. So let's pretend this information, which is fictional in this case, these two colleges don't actually exist. Let's say you might be a high school student and you're trying to consider what college you want to attend after you graduate from high school. We start reading this passage. We see that students in the northern region of the state, let's imagine that's where you live, have the choice of enrolling in two different schools: Stanton College or Burns College. Now, it turns out, if you read this, and I already have, there are at least 6 points of comparison between these two colleges. Let's start with the beginning. We have two different schools, Stanton College or Burns College. So we might create a chart that has Stanton College on one line or one row and Burns on the other. And I've already filled in these 6 points of comparison just to save time. They have to do with funding, location, what kind of campus it is, the specialty of the school, the faculty, what the faculty like, and the cost of attending that school. And again, I got that information just from reading the paragraph. Going back to this passage, we see, as I've highlighted, Stanton College is nestled in the Oakdale Mountains, and Burns College is in the city of Burnsforth. So if you go back and continue on, Stanton is a state-supported college, a public college. Burns College, on the other hand, is privately supported. So if we go back to our chart and fill in that information, we see that for Stanton College, the funding, Stanton is state-supported versus Burns, which is private. So we've summarized that information and dropped it into this chart to make it easy and quick to spot the difference in funding between these two colleges. The location: Stanton College is located in the Oakdale Mountains, and Burns is in a city called Burnsforth. So again, just at a glance, we can see how the location differs between these two colleges. If you were to go through the rest of the passage, which I won't do in this video, but if you read through it, you would find that the other differences, the differences in campus, the specialty of each school, and so forth, you can drop them into this chart or graph, this matrix. So again, to go back to my earlier question, imagine you have a few minutes before an exam or midterm where you're being tested on some kind of information, let's say the information here in this chart. What would you rather have in front of you to study in those last few minutes? This nice, concise matrix that draws the distinctions for you that you need to know, the differences between the two colleges in this case, or a giant block of text? Again, most students would probably prefer to have the chart, the graph, the visualization, because it's easier to engage with. Now, at this point, many students will be asking themselves, well, it's going to take some effort. It'll take time and work to create the visualization, won't it? Yes, that is definitely the case. Some students don't like to do visual note taking or other even note techniques because it just takes effort. They think if I can just stick to other techniques such as highlighting or reading and rereading, I'll be okay. Well, maybe that's possible, but I think you will find quickly as a college student that there will be a point where those techniques that you might have brought out of high school are not as effective as they used to be because the ideas are more complex. The demands upon you as a college student are much more rigorous than they were before. So again, I just encourage you not to close the door on anything, whether it's visual note taking or any other technique. Try it a few times, see if you find it helpful. If you don't, okay, that's fair. You can go back to doing other things, but you may be surprised. Despite the effort, despite the work it takes, you may actually end up finding that you're able to spend less time studying. You may actually, in the long term, exert less effort because on the front end of your learning, on the front end of your studying sessions, you invest some time in creating visual notes, for example, and that actually saves you time having to read, reread later on. To review our discussion for today, we discussed the topic of visual note taking. I explained what is a visualization, what's the idea behind visual note taking, and then we briefly reviewed 3 kinds of visualization or visual notes: sequence, hierarchy, and matrix. If you want more guidance, more tips on visual note taking, there are many excellent references available on YouTube as well as on the internet. You might also check with the Learning Center at your university or college. They may offer workshops or one-on-one sessions with tutors who can help you develop and improve your note taking in general, but especially a technique like visual note taking. I hope you find this information helpful. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click on the thumbs up icon below. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon. YouTube will notify you of future videos added to this channel. Remember, college success is challenging, it takes work and effort, but it is certainly within your grasp. Good luck.